The University of Massachusetts Amherst acknowledges that it was founded and built on the unceded homelands of the Pocumtuck Nation in the land of the Norwottuck community. We begin with gratitude for nearby waters and lands. We recognize these lands and waters as important relations with which we are all interconnected and depend on to sustain life and well-being. The Pocumtuck had connections with these lands for millennia. Over 400 years of colonization, when Pocumtuck peoples were displaced, many joined their Algonquian relatives to the east, south, west, and north. That includes Mashpee and Aquinnah, Wampanoag, Nipmuc, Narragansett, Mohegan, Pequot, Mohican communities, and Abenaki and other nations of the Wabanaki Confederacy. These native peoples still maintain connections and relationships of care for these lands today. We also acknowledge that the University of Massachusetts Amherst is a land grant university. As part of the Model Land Grant Act, portions of land from 82 native nations west of the Mississippi were sold to provide the resources to found and build this university. As an active first step toward decolonization, we encourage you to learn more about the native nations whose homelands UMass Amherst now resides on and the indigenous homelands on which you live and work. We also invite you to deepen your relationship to these living lands and waters. My name is Vika, and I'm this year's Art Sustainability Activism Fellow. And on behalf of ASA, thank you all for joining us for this interdisciplinary panel as a part of our fall events. ASA, now in its seventh year, is a collaboration among the Fine Arts Center, the MFA for Poets and Writers, Native American and Indigenous Studies, and the School of Earth and Sustainability, and works to connect artists, scientists, and changemakers. Before we get into the panel, thank you to the Fine Arts Center team and Hillary for all their work on this panel, and to Abigail Chibetnoy for helping organize and generously agreeing to moderate this panel, and also to all our panelists for participating. And also thank you to Noy Holland, who works year-round to make this series possible, and who's worked tirelessly to make our fall events happen. A quick note that Michael John Garces will be a few minutes late to the panel. So he'll just join when he arrives to the Zoom. The Art Sustainability Activism Annual Interdisciplinary Panel draws scientists, poets, playwrights, musicians, historians, visual artists, novelists, performers, and political organizers into conversation. Intrinsic to this gathering of minds is the question, what can we do with what we know? Scientific research and artistic expression, even while maintaining separation from social movements, can themselves constitute resistance against destructive norms. What are the pitfalls of making this resistance explicit? What are the benefits? How might art illuminate scientific findings and elevate political discourse? How might science and history inform artistic practice, and vice versa? The ASA Interdisciplinary Panel seeks to exemplify a form of cross-pollination critical to our livable future. Our moderator for this panel will be Abigail Chibetnoy. Abigail Chibetnoy is a Koniak descendant and member of the Tangirnak Native Village in Kodiak. She is the author of In the Current Where Drowning is Beautiful, Wesley in 2022, and How to Dress a Fish, Wesley in 2019, shortlisted for the 2020 International Griffin Prize for Poetry, and winner of the 2020 Colorado Book Award, and the Linocut Illustrated Chapbook Converging Lines of Light from Flower Press in 2021. She was a 2021 Peter Taylor Fellow at Kenyon Writers Workshop and the recipient of the 2020 Witter Bynner Native Poet Residency at Elsewhere Studios in Paonia, Colorado. Her poems have appeared in Hayden's Ferry Review, Boston Review, Tin House, Gulf Coast, Lit Hub, and Red Ink, among others. She currently teaches at the Institute of American Indian Arts and is an assistant professor at UMass Amherst. Abigail holds an MFA in creative writing from Colorado State University. Find her at salmonfisherpoet.com. And I will turn it over to Abby.
Hi, Vika Chamai, and welcome to our wonderful panelists. I am so excited to be here in conversation this evening with Daniel Wildcat, Layli Long Soldier, Larissa Fasthorse, and Michael John Garces. I am still kind of taking in so much of what's happened in the past week here at UMass Amherst. We just had Phil Deloria come and give a Kaplan lecture about how we know what we know. And so I find it so fitting. And Madeline Fitch, yes, thank you for popping your video on there. I was doing the mental math. I'm like, we're missing a panelist. Thank you to all of our panelists. I'm so excited. Yeah, to be following this question of how we know what we know with what can we do with what we know. And when Noi asked me to moderate this panel and sent me the list of our wonderful, gracious, brilliant participants, I was struck by, on viewing the list, that in consideration of the series title, Art Sustainability Activism, and past panels I have participated in and witnessed, I'm struck by how arts heavy this panel is, how many wonderful artists we have, and scholars as well, and also artists who are scholars, scholarship certainly informing much of the work that I do. But I don't state this as a weakness or even an ignorance of the intersection of these concerns and the arbitrary division of disciplines concerns imposed by Western epistemology. But I think it provides an interesting opening to discuss the role and importance, perhaps even the responsibility of art here, including the literary arts as well as visual and dramatic arts. And even I think it's an art to be able to convey philosophy and science and observations to a broad public as well, and to take some of that science-minded academic discourse into a broader arena of conversation as well. And so what is our responsibility in enacting real meaningful change to increase or to address an increasingly more dismal climate, to put it one way? And to clarify as we start, I know we've had some back and forth about how when you put climate and crisis in a room together, we all think immediately of climate change and the climate crisis, and that's absolutely a very real climate or a very real crisis that is always in the back of my mind. But I want to clarify that I also use the term climate to broadly include the social and the political climates, even the economic climates that we're currently living and making in, as much as the more specifically environmentally driven discourse. So I want to open this up, and I guess I should have maybe done more of an individual lineup first rather than now as I'm speaking in this Zoom sphere where we can't quite read each other the same as in a room. I have this broad opening question of what do the arts have to offer us as a society in a moment largely characterized by division, fear, and anxiety. And since that is an open-ended question, let's start this popcorn style. Who's ready to dive in? Can I toss this to Madeline first? What do the arts have to offer as a society in a moment largely characterized by division, fear, and anxiety?
Wow. I can't believe I have to go first. I'm really interested to hear what other people have to say about this. Yeah, that's a big ticket question. Um, I think that you know, we know that art helps us remember things. We know that art helps us be difficult. Where artists are gadflies. Art is about participation and action and risk rather than a sort of manufactured distance, and art is about relationship. So that's something I think that can provide um, like meaning and worth and our ability to remember ourselves and the possibilities that are out there in this particular cultural moment. It's such a broad question. Sometimes I think that things are moving so quickly that and then a lot of the work that many of us probably in the panel are engaged in can feel really urgent and reactive. And art is something incredibly fundamental that also asks us to slow down. And I mean, maybe the main thing I would emphasize is the remembering, the asking that nothing be disposed of, and that we really just really try to remember everything. And that's something that art calls us to do. So thank you
Yes,
for asking.
Yes, yes, I should have warned you all that I notice even in my teaching, I just go right for the big overarching questions. I go right for the grand narrative, even as I work in the micro narrative of poetics. But I love that you brought up gadfly. That's, I think, the only thing I remember from my undergraduate philosophy class was Plato's talk of the necessary gadfly. And every time I have that question of difficult poetry and discomfort in poetry, I'm reminded of that phrase. Let's turn it, let's go back and forth between the arts and scholarship here. Um, or, well, yeah, I think you have as much to offer as coming more from the academic side of things, and that might very much be an imposition. Daniel Wildcat, would you like to comment on the arts in its broadest conception?
Well, I think, I really appreciate Madeline's statement, but and your introduction. I mean, I've argued in my work that, I use multiple, try to capture the multiple dimensions of climate, and I've been arguing for at least almost 2 decades that we can't even begin to address the physical climate change we face unless we have a cultural climate change. We desperately need a cultural climate change if we're going to even address the physical climate change we face. And I happen to believe this is precisely where art comes in and speaks so powerfully. We always talk about, trying to find effective solutions. I don't think you can find effective solutions unless you touch the affective dimension of our being, our feelings, our emotions. I think our spirit. I think art does that far better than any graphs or charts my atmospheric science colleagues can present about climate change. When you see people's, their faces just kind of glaze over after looking at so many graphs and charts, they would be the first to admit it. It's things they use when they're talking to other scientists. But I've argued now for a long time that, I think there's so much of the affective dimension that we need to really uh, light a fire if we're going to be able to get, the public motivated to address the climate crises we face. And then, here's the interesting about using that broader definition of climate and culture is that, you know, could we have one crisis at a time, please? We've got so many crises going on right now, wherever you turn. Education, we've got a climate crisis, we've got economic crises, we've got justice crises. I think in this period of multiple crises that we face, what we need more than ever are the creative artists who can really, again, use that art to motivate people to action. We do have a problem right now with a lot of people not having hope. And I think artists can help engender some sense of hope, some broader sense of connectivity, relationship with the balance of creation. And so I'll stop there.
Well, good. If you would have gone on too much longer, you would have anticipated so many of our future questions. No, but I think what's really interesting about one of the comments you made is, talking about how in order to fight this climate change that we're not doing enough of, we need a cultural change. And I'm
Mhm.
thinking about just how much we think of change and the immediate association is fear or
Mhm.
resistance, or when associated to climate change, it's negative. And thinking about how what we don't necessarily associate with change so much is there's uncertainty, and there's perhaps fear and anxiety attached to that uncertainty, but so much potential as well, and so much that we need to change, even as we can be respectful of tradition and respectful of history, respectful of where we've been, while also acknowledging that we're taking in more knowledge, we're asking different questions, and having that capacity and ability to change, I think, is something that our young folks at least need to hear more. Perhaps also some of the older folks, but I'm thinking of conversations I've had with my mother and how she's quick to remind me that change is hard at her age, and hard but not impossible. Um Layli, would you like to discuss this responsibility of and potential of the arts to offer us in this moment, characterized as we are in various crises? Or reframe that entire premise. I don't know. I mean, maybe I also, it's not the first time, it wouldn't be the first time I'd be accused of finding the negative in the narrative.
I mean, first of all, I'm grateful to be here, just to say to be with all of you. Such people I admire so much. But I feel like I could answer this in so many different ways. So I'm gonna start, I'm gonna do the best I can. Um, the first thing I was thinking about as as it pertains to the arts and what it has to offer in a moment like this. Um, Daniel made me think of a quote, and forgive the source, but from Stalin, I think it was from Stalin, who said, a single death is a tragedy, but a million deaths is a statistic, right? So it really makes me remember that it is like through the arts, through the particulars, and through story, through who we are, who we come from, our families, our communities, and being able to give that through the poem, through the play, through the short story, through the novel, that we're able to sort of affect, as Daniel said, the feelings, the heart, and this raises social consciousness and awareness. It makes me think a lot of when I was younger, the effect that the arts had on me. And one of the most memorable moments I think of is The Bluest Eye. And I remember that novel, um, the profound effect it had on me to really understand what internalized racism looks like, like what that means. But it could only be you can understand it through studies and reports and statistics and what have you. But to read that story and to understand it through that particular character who prayed for blue eyes, right? And all that happened around her and in her life. I mean, that turned everything around for me as a young person. And I was able to also recognize it in myself, or recognize it in my relatives sometimes, or maybe talk to my child about it in a certain way. So I think that, yeah, that's one way of sort of thinking about this question that I have. The other thing I have to say is, and I'm going to speak specifically towards in terms of like the native experience and the present moment. I know that the climate, the social climate, or the climate we're in feels really dire at times and chaotic, but I also like to remember, and I don't want to sound, you know, I don't want to sound too heavy, but I do like to remember that as Native people, we have already been through our own apocalypses several times, things that have like just caused extreme devastation to who we are as a people, our life ways, our food ways, our ceremonial practices, our spirituality, our languages, you name it, our land base, we're moved, the losses that we've experienced. So we've been through this. And so I think that that is what really brings me back to feeling okay with staying centered and staying really grounded in who I am and who we are, let's say specifically as Lakota people. There are things that I think about that maybe I might feel a sense of urgency, but I'm always thinking about a sense of timelessness, how my work can last beyond this particular moment. And a lot of those things also come back down to our values, some of our teachings, and those are things that I like. I feel like our attention and to continue to cultivate that and help it grow in our, with our young people in our communities, finding projects or ways, because that's creating life. It's creating renewal and growth, and that creates hope, right? And even in the most dire times, we can still experience some of that beauty. And so, I just, on that note, and I'll just conclude with this, just to say that, like I said, we've been through our own apocalypses and traumas, and this time seems very difficult as well. Um, but I also like to look at things in generationally. So I also look right now, the moment we're in with our young people, for example, in our Native communities, they are so different. They're in such a different place than even I was at. Like our kids, you look at the young ones, they love to speak our language. They're like so proud to be able to hold a little conversation or to sing our songs now, and to participate in like certain doings in our communities, to wear our traditional clothing at certain times. Like it's such a different time. And just one generation, my generation, when we were young, we grew up with a lot of shame sometimes, or things were so private. Like if we did express ourselves certain ways, it was just very private. So things are changing despite the hardship and the struggle we might feel right now. And last but not least, on the thing of climate, I also think about the rematriation of our buffalo nations that's happening right now. That's a very real and practical thing that is happening that affects the land, affects who we are as a people. And that too is growing and sort of renewing, even though it feels so dire. So there's all these things happening at once. That's my answer.
I know our conversation after your reading the other night was a bit of a salve to me, that reminder to experience joy and feel joy. And I'm reminded of when I first went back to my own homelands. I grew up in and live in diaspora from my Supiaq homelands and community, but I've been able to go up there and reconnect and meet relatives and start to forge real relationships. And something a cousin told me when I was visiting his boat with and talking about my great grandfather's experience and lamenting that it was so hard for me to get back to Alaska and I could only spend little bits of time there. And he told me, well, maybe your family was sent east to survive. And that's something that's always struck with me, and in how he was able to take that narrative and that displacement and all of the anxiety and heartache that might have also been complicated by joy and success, but to really frame it in this way that I felt gave me an invitation to participate in my community, but also a kind of grace to also remember where I and be grounded where I did land as well. Um, and your conversation, your comments about about the bluest eye makes me now want to jump to the community question, which is perfect because, well, I guess again, we're not in person, so this is so strange. I don't know if Larissa and Michael, you are two separate individuals who work together but have your own arts and your own work as well. And so I don't want to make the supposition to lump you both in as one speaker, but I think both of your works at UMass here right now are heavily informed by community, and that's something that your comment about the bluest eye made me think of lately in terms of our audience. And we have these grand sweeping questions of how can we set people at ease through our art? How can we make people think with our art and change with our art? And that's a complicated question depending on who your audience is, who your immediate audience is, who we're writing for first and foremost. And I know you mentioned laylee about the importance of community to you. And so I think that's something I want to circle back to and perhaps building on this question, but I think it can also segue and fold into inviting Larissa and Michael to also address this question of what the arts have to offer us as a society in these times. And I'm sorry, my child is banging at my office door, speaking of the next generation. So, um, Larissa, if you would like to go first,
Sure.
and then I'm gonna, yeah, mute.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, everybody. And yeah, thank you, Laylee. That's exactly, I mean, seriously, what I was thinking, I think too. It's like, Michael and I are here at UMass right now in residence, and we work with communities to create work, theatrical, very analog work, theatrical work about themselves. And everything's done in person with just us talking to people and going to land. And so yesterday we took a trip with a Nipmuc woman to just be on land and listen to the trees and the rocks and hear their stories. And along the way, she was telling her stories. And I was like, what was it? I think Michael was something crazy. Like the great dying was like 100,000 people that died in one winter here. So when we talk, it's like perspective, like, yeah, things have been worse, so much worse. And people died 100,000 at a time here on these lands. People were being hunted with bounties by, our government here and all over this area. So it's, yeah, perspective about what it really means to be in dire times. And I think, Michael and I do such, like I said, we do such analog work. So really, I mean, our work, our process, we often say, is our artwork. Our process is just bringing people together to be in one space and talk and tell stories and connect. And I think that's, no matter what's happening in the larger world, what's better than that? What's more sacred than that, right? It's just being together and connecting with each other and telling each other our stories and witnessing each other. And that's really what we get to do as a job. And it's so simple and so small. And yet I think it's, I dare say it's one of the, I see it change lives all the time. And I'll stop there and let Michael say something more articulate.
I'm very sure it won't be more articulate or even as articulate, but and I'm grateful to be on this in this company and in this conversation on this wonderful platform. So thank you all, and thank you for your responses. I particularly in I guess the work we do in community, but really more and more just in whatever work, I think less about what art can. I don't think art can do anything. I think it's what people do for each other, right? Like what are we doing as people? And I think some of us have a proclivity and a mind towards aesthetic response and aesthetic interaction with the world, and others have a more scholarly or perhaps analytical or critical response, and other people do practice medicine or practice politics, which sometimes I wish I was just more of a straight political person and could just go throw rocks through a window or something. I don't know. But I tend to, just think about like, how can we make something beautiful? And I think making beauty is radical, right? And can change lives, but it is a different thing. And so I think about that. And in thinking about that, Daniel mentioned, the effect of how you can have effective impact on people. And I think that is one thing that we as human beings and as practitioners we can do. And I think the tool of the process of art making is an effective tool in that way if done right. And I hear a lot often about how theater and how the arts, somehow you stimulate or help people practice empathy, and that may or may not be true, but I think empathy is essentially, finding commonality with, finding, oh, what is alike in the person across from me? Like if it's my child, they look like me, hopefully, or they sound like me, or they act like me, and so I love that about them, and I can connect with that, and we find that with people, like we empathize with what we find. I recognize myself, or I recognize that in myself and in that other person, and so I feel empathy for them. And I think we do that. I think we do that as animals, like biologically, we do that. Unless you're, I don't know, one of these sociopaths in charge of Project 2025, which is just an extension of Project Christopher Columbus and Project America. But I think what's more interesting to me is work that goes beyond that and really challenges us ourselves as practitioners, and hopefully our collaborators in community, and hopefully people who come to experience the work, to see to be connected to what they see as other in other people, whether that is people who they perceive to be in a quote unquote different community, or whether that's people who live next door to them and live in their community. Like if we can love, or at least feel connection to what is other in other people, then I think we have a chance of addressing some of this multiplicity of crises that we are experiencing. And I seek to do that in my work every day, and I think that's when I perceive that the work that Larissa and I do together has the most profound impact.
Thank you. Yes, I'm struck by the relationship across, all, and I'm not surprised. This tends to be how these conversations play out when you get a bunch of artists and um, the right kinds of academics in the room together, and it really, this emphasis on
I have to
relationality.
say also the right kinds of artists, because
Well, that's true. You're right. I must hold our fellow artists accountable as well. My daughter is making her artwork right here next to me as well. I want to talk more about this question of community and how it drives especially the process of the work. I know that's something that drives the analog nature, Larissa and Michael, of your work, and I know, as I said, Layli, it's something you mentioned in your Q&A of how you consider the impact that your work is going to have. And in reading your latest book, Daniel, on indigenuity, learning the lessons of Mother Earth, and the claim for this sort of affective culture shift, my initial posing of this question, and I had intended it to be open for everyone, but it came from that book specifically, was how you understand decolonization in relation to climate change, and if there's any other way of framing this divided discourse beyond settler, colonizer, and indigenous. And I want to kind of lean on that last bit there, to also invite non-indigenous participants in this panel into this question as well, to really think about what it is to ask for a shift in paradigm, for a shift in worldview, what models we look for to find or to imagine this new way forward. And so, Daniel, I would invite that for yourself, in terms of how you understand decolonization in relation to climate change. I have a sense of your answer from reading your book, but not everyone in this audience has. And then I'd also like to open it to Madeline as well. Like, what drives your own work and your own speculation of a sustainable future as you treat in your recent novel Stay and Fight, which also questions how we might resist a traditional life or vision of America and the American dream. But well, I'll let Daniel start, and then Madeline, I'd love for you to also join this.
Yeah. Well, I'll start by saying, I think, one of the things about decolonization is it's essentially a negative critique. You're just saying, what you don't like, what, you are opposed to, and pointing it out in a very critical way, but it's a negative critique. And I think that's sort of something one goes through. My work now, and you're familiar with it, and maybe others will look at it, but is really making an argument that, you have to really understand that the collision of we've had around the planet of native peoples with European settlers and colonizers has been an ex post facto demonstration that the colonizing or settler mind, one of its incredible strengths is they come in with the self-confidence that they have the truth. They have it. And it's their moral obligation to make sure you get it too. They've done this in Africa. They've done it in the Pacific Islands. They've done it in South America. They've done it in the Arctic. They've done it all over the world. And I think the beauty of indigenous thinking is, that's not the way it works. That the power of place, as my dear friend and mentor Vine Deloria would have formulated it, is that we each are beautiful. We each are unique and expressions of all of this complex relationships we are involved with: the land, the air, the water, the plants, the animals, the moon, the sun. That's not indigenous romanticism. That's indigenous realism. That's the human condition. We are in these complex relationships. And so it is just so terribly naive to think that there's one way of looking at everything and understanding it. This is where art becomes very important because artists are so creative. They bring their personality, they bring all of those relationships into the power that makes their work. So my answer to your question is basically to say that, I really take it as one of the strengths of indigenous thinking is that it dissuades you, it disabuses you of any notion that, there's one way of looking at the world that is the right way. There are many ways of looking at the world, and it kind of depends on where you happen to be sitting or standing, how the world looks. And, you know, I know we're not supposed to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but here's the bottom line. Diversity is a fundamental fact of life on this beautiful thin skirt our mother wears. Mother Earth, all the biological life is incredibly diverse. We don't just have one tree. We don't just have one kind of fish. We just don't have one kind of bird. We've got birds. We've got many fish. We've got many trees, many plants, and each of them has a place. Now, the ecologist would call that a niche. I think our work today is to really do everything we can to suggest that what they might try to do is just put on a different lens. Try to see the world in a different way. And the best way to do that is to meet other people, have discussions, have relationships. And so I think that's really what our work's about right now. And that's what my work's about, is trying to tell people, don't buy this binary notion, of how the world is good and evil, black and white, nature, culture, sacred, profane. Guess what? It's all mixed up. It's all entangled. And I find some beauty in that deep relationality.
Thank you. I agree, especially about the beauty in that diversity. I want to turn this question to Madeline, but I also realize I'd be remiss in not reminding our audience members to post questions in the chat. Feel free to do so at any point, and we will be turning to those audience questions shortly. But Madeline, I'd love to hear what drives your speculation of a sustainable future in your work.
Yeah, thank you so much. really great to hear Daniel's response to this, and especially ending with this notion of like, sorry, but it's all messy, it's all mixed together. It's like, yeah, it's going to be an uphill battle to keep all of that stuff separate. And I'm a novelist writing in an Appalachian context, and my first novel, you know, centered around a family where a pipeline was threatening the place that they lived. And my new novel is about anti-fascist traditions in Appalachia. And, you know, Appalachia is a place that people have, you know, settlers and white Europeans have kind of made, it's really tried to push the purity myth about Appalachia, right? It's like Scots-Irish, purity, the Willy Wonka, no one ever goes in, no one ever comes out. So we know that that's not true about this region. And I think that particularly in the context in which people have fought the oil and gas industry and extractive industry and the fossil fuel industry here, you know, I think unfortunately sometimes people of settler descent, white people, we can look at the idea of being anti-colonial or decolonization as sort of like an altruistic, like this would be a great thing. We would all be better people if, you know. And it's really, and I mean, Daniel pointed to this is like an existential issue for everybody, right? And we talk about like collective liberation, and we talk about, you know, we can get pretty jargony. But on a real level, I think something that has happened for land defenders, and I've seen it here in Appalachia, is that when people got to know each other facing, and this kind of actually goes back a little bit to what Michael was talking about with the role of art, getting to know each other, looking at other people and seeing ourselves, you know, and I don't want to overstate it because we need to be alongside each other. And this is, I think, where the political notion of solidarity comes into play. It's not about saying, oh, I'm exactly like you, but it is about identifying the ways in which we can experience solidarity and learn from each other. And when Appalachian people started getting to know land defenders, and of course that's Indigenous people on Turtle Island are in, you know, the front lines, like really showing us the pathway forward for how to fight these industries. It's been really incredible to see, you know, the level of people in Appalachia fighting the Mountain Valley Pipeline, traveling to fight with Anishinaabe people against Line 3, traveling to Standing Rock, traveling up into British Columbia, to put their bodies on the line. And then vice versa, you know, lots of Indigenous frontliners coming down to Appalachia. It's like a 91% white place, you know, and just like throwing down really hard against these pipelines. And I think it's really terrifying to the fascists and to the fascism of the fossil fuel industry and the American colonial project when we know each other so well and when we're fighting together. And then I think for me, as you know, a settler descended person, I take a tip from I like the Portrait of the Colonizer Who Refuses, the Mimi essay, because there's something novelistic about it in that it's an absurd position. You know, to be a refuser of that position, there's discomfort and there's absurdity to it. It's not about like, it's no, you know, it's not the way that Hollywood portrays it, right? There's a messiness to trying to be in that sort of like active role of refusal or solidarity. But art is about that. It's about this kind of like messy everyday, one foot in front of the other, getting to know each other, conflict. So art is about nuance, but not nuance that's equivocal and equivocating, but nuance that's about necessary conflicts that happen while we're doing real work together. And so I'll end there, but that's just it's something that this discussion has made me think a lot about, and I think it's one of the ways that art and action tend to go together for me.
Yeah, I'm struck, and I'm like mentally like listing all the binaries we've had in my head in this conversation, and this way of breaking out of the binary, even as I'm also about to push into that notion with this question. I feel like so many of our, well, and because of the questions, right? The way I framed these questions, so much of my own concerns have been what is the role and responsibility of the artist, of the work out in the world. Even as we're telling our students, don't write your poem about what you think you know, or don't proselytize in your poem. Don't start with the truth. Let the poem be a process of unfolding and a process of discovery and uncertainty. Um, and yet here I am. Well, what can our art do in these sort of utilitarian functionist kind of conversations? But it makes me think of, again, Layli, what you were talking about, how certain work will sit with your community and how it will affect your community, and how that drives your own decision making as an artist for what you will put in a poem or in a work of art, and what you won't in that way. And I'm thinking about how all these questions are: how can we comfort our youth? How can we comfort our audience? How can we activate our audience? How can we inspire our audience? And I'm wondering if there's so much emphasis on a sort of outward, distant, separate audience in that case. And I'm wondering how much of a more local looking and more of a maybe comfort or affirmation is also part of this work of activism for the audience. And just speaking a little bit more about how that concern for and care for community drives your work, Layli.
Oh, I'm trying to understand your question.
Yeah, I know. I wind my way to them, don't I? Um, yeah, I guess I wondered if you could talk more for this audience about how your care for community also drives your work, and how it's not always about necessarily activating or inspiring or calls to action of a large anonymous sort of public on the other end of an audience, but how the immediate audience and the immediate community that you work in also informs your work.
Mm. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I would say like my family and my community are the first people that I think about when I'm making things. They're my toughest critics. They're the people who can spot, um, you know, things like, let's say I'm pandering to an audience. They can see it right away. Or let's say I'm sharing things that are a little that are not meant for outside community. They are the first ones to recognize that. So I'm always thinking they're the first sort of the people that I think about most. And so even with like really tough subjects, um, let's say, for example, I have a piece that where I write about education, and I've written a little bit about like boarding school experience and some of that history, and also present day experiences for our young people. I still want to be very careful. I still think first and foremost, um, I don't want I don't want to hurt my family. Like I don't want it to be so heavy that they can't finish reading the piece. Do you understand what I'm saying? So it doesn't mean that I avoid the truth. It doesn't mean that yeah, or that I skip over anything. I work with the truth, but that's part of my work as an artist to take all of these things into consideration. That's my work, to work with the language in such a way that um it's courageous and it's truth telling, but it's also caring and compassionate to my own community. So those are all things that I'm constantly tinkering with and trying to get it to land just right. And I don't know if I'm always successful, but I try, you know. That's, yeah.
Thank you. Yes, especially that, the consideration of how to tell truth, how to tell heavy truth, and also to not make it so heavy that our audience and those we care about and those we're most anxious to converse with and be in relation with, to not make the burden so great that they can't stay with the work. Vika, I don't believe I've seen any questions come through the chat, but I know we're coming up on our time here. So if anyone would like to post a question in the chat, please do so. Otherwise, I think, and this is entirely selfish of me, one way I would, and we've touched a bit on some of these topics, but something that I'm really interested in is in these dire times, as we've said, even as we've already experienced and survived other dire times, but in these dire times and in this time where we're asking students to come to class and talk about academics while we're involved in multiple wars, while we're pushing agendas that we know are going to have devastating and irreversible consequences on our land, as we're giving them degrees and sending them off to find jobs that don't exist. I'm struck by how so often in my own readings, I'll find myself halfway through a reading, and even as I'm writing my poems in a hope that there's empowerment and growth out of the wounding, sometimes I sit there and I'm just like, oh, I feel like I have to apologize to the audience for bringing the mood down, for being such a depressing poet in these times. And so I think a lovely way to end this evening together would be, I'm really interested in how do we balance these hard truths and these dire times and these difficulties with beauty, with hope, with joy? What are either personal practices that help you manage that weight, or what are practices you carry into your art to help your communities manage that weight? And or what kinds of coalitions or activisms should our students, should our young people be turning their attention to in these times? And oh, let's see, who haven't we heard from more recently? Let's start with Larissa.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't I don't share your direness or your negative at all. So yeah, no, I really don't. I mean, our people are beautiful, and there's, like Laylee was saying, Michael and I are doing long-term projects in our homelands, Laylee's and mine, in the Great Plains, with Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota people. I'm just so like the youth, they're so inspiring. Same, like I get to like turn to young people and say, hey, can you translate all this into Lakota or Dakota for me? And they do. And it's like, it's awesome because I didn't get to learn that. I'm still trying to learn our language. I mean, I don't know. I feel great about our people. So yeah, I mean, it's been so much worse. So I don't feel that way. And I'm a comedy writer primarily. And so I write comedies. I like to make people laugh and have fun. And I'd say, when you were talking about community, it really made me think about, because Michael and I have the work we do together, we have the trick of getting to ask the community who they want to hear these things. So, we did a play called Native Nation in Arizona, and when we make our plays with community, they create the work. They tell us what it is. They have all final control over everything that's done and said on our stages, not us. And they also say who it's for. And so, like, we had the play we did there. I was thinking about how they said the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community wanted it to be just for them. And we're like, great. Then it's just for you. And then we had 500 community members show up and just do it for them. Like, you can choose, you know what I mean? You can choose community, and you can, and you can choose to make things just for the people that want to celebrate themselves together. And there's so much about celebrating their awesomeness. Sure, there were some difficult things too, but a lot of it was just about celebrating their awesomeness, and like, and that's what they wanted to do. So we did that. I mean, then we also performed it one weekend out in a public showing as well with the larger public. But there was so much laughter and joy and fun and yes, I guess I'm not in the same place you are at all. I'm like, it's been so much worse. So I mean, that's what elders with the first Trump administration were working in South Dakota then, and so many elders are like, Larissa, please, it's been so much worse. Come on, calm down, get over yourself. You think you're so important that this is the worst it's been? Please, it's been so much worse. Stop thinking you're that important. So, yes, I'm just continuing to enjoy our community and our revitalization of our cultures and language and getting to make art. And yeah, there's difficult things, but there's always difficult things.
No, I appreciate that. What I'm taking from that is you can choose celebration and you can choose joy and also again, a framing of perspective. And this is mine. Sorry, my child has found my Maria Tall Chief Barbie, which is the one Barbie that I have not let her open and play with recklessly. And speaking of, you can choose celebration, but also who your community is and who we look at in our community and how there is joy and resilience to be found too and right, our community and our relationship, there are also layers of connectivity to be cognizant of as well. Thank you. Michael.
Yeah, I mean, I think Larissa said it. I don't necessarily need to add too much to it. I mean, I think in our work we ask a lot of questions and listen to the answers and try to in making the work be responsive. And the community knows what it needs and tells us what it needs, and we sort of try to create context. And when we are doing it correctly, they say we're doing it correctly, and when they say we're not, they tell us in no uncertain terms, and we shift. And I think we have some skills and craft to share, insofar as people want that sharing. And, creating occasions for joy, creating occasions for beauty, I think is as good a response to the world, and to the bad things in the world, or the things that seem hard or negative as any, in fact, better in many cases. And I think we do have to be careful about recency bias. It always seems like the crisis is not, and media is telling us everything is critical because it draws eyes and draws clicks. And I worry about the world every day, of course, and for all kinds of reasons. But I celebrate what is resilient and strong in the communities that we have the privilege of working in.
Yeah, it reminds me of the idea of negative capability in the poem, right? Like rather than assume that we even know what the crisis is or what the community is concerned with, what's most pressing for the community, rather than going in with this assumed narrative. It's a reminder to myself to stop and ask the question of, well, what is the pressing concern? What is the matter at hand? What is the interest, the need of the community? Thank you. Madeline.
I feel like I've spoken a lot, but I mean, yeah, maybe I'd pass the question along, I think.
Okay. Daniel, personal practices to manage the weight or sending our
Well,
youth to coalition?
I tell you what, the best thing for me is to get out of doors. I mean, again, I know this will resonate with a lot of you on this, podcast and my fellow, panelists. In our Zoya traditions, my Yuchi traditions, I mean, our kinship extends to all life. And so when I really think of community and family, I include the locust tree, the hackberry tree, the quince bush that's right outside my home, right here, the grass, the earth, the Kansas River. I'm sitting less than, half a mile from the south bank of the Kansas River as it meanders across the northern edge of downtown Lawrence, Kansas, where I'm sitting, and on the ancestral homelands of the Osage and the Kaw peoples. It's I that for me is really the key is You know, it can take you out of these boxes we sit in a lot of the times and these flat screens we're looking at. And you just begin to realize how much there is around you you had nothing to do with. You had absolutely nothing to do with. And yet you're you get to see that beautiful Kansas River. You get to see the beautiful trees, the eagles that are fishing, you know, when it freezes over and the water's open right below the dam, they gather all around there to fish. And it's, I mean, my gosh, you're going like, I didn't have to fill out a credit application to see any of that. I didn't have to fill out, see whether I was credit worthy, you know, to receive that beauty. That's what keeps me feeling balanced in a very uh, uh, out of sorts, out of balance world right now, it seems like. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
It's very fitting that as you're saying that, my daughter is tempting fate with my shelf of treasures from home, all the rocks and shells that remind me of my homelands, and telling me this rock is beautiful, mommy. I love these serendipitous moments. Layli, I think you've also spoken a lot to this, but anything else you would care to add as we come up on time here?
Yeah, I don't know if this is if this fits the question exactly, but it's more like applies to the conversation in general. Just I think Daniel a while back when you were talking about decolonization, you had the question about decolonization and you expressed some things that I really agreed with or I've been thinking about a lot. And I was thinking how like I hate that word. And I hate it only in the sense like as a poet because I think about words and spelling a lot. So the word decolonization right in the middle of it is colonize. Like what the heck? So it's again putting the center of attention onto the colonizer and I just don't like that word because I don't think it helps us at all. Like, and so it really made me think about, well, then what other word would I use? And I think colonization, the problem with it is that it also creates a time marker. So it creates a kind of way of being or a way of doing things that has a time marker on it. And that time marker is colonization. But I think that if we all go back to like who we come from and our languages and our beliefs, like we have things that are much older, but apply to present day, you know? So I was really thinking about like even in our language, um, I think probably other people have other Lakota people would have different words they would think of. But for me, I think of a word, we have wo Lakota. And that to me really expresses that whole process. Wo Lakota, when you put wo in front of a word, then you are um, making it into kind of like a way, a pathway, like a spiritual way. And so to practice that, and Lakota means friendship or to ally, right? It is to be in relation to the world around us. And so, I mean, that way of being, that way, Lakota really centers me. There's no time marker, and it applies to present day. And it's also the way that our families lived, you know, it's way back. There's no date to its beginning. So, and then I was thinking about I have a teenager who's half Dene, and we were talking about this. I was talking about Wolakota, and then I said also because my kid is half Dene or Navajo, and so I was saying, you know, like I'm not Navajo, and I'm not an expert on Navajo culture, but from being around them and the community. One of the things I love is they have a practice called Beauty Way. And so I was talking about this with my kid too. I said, you know, we have like our Lakota relationship is at the center of our way of seeing the world. And I was like, for Dana people, like beauty before you, beauty behind you, beauty above you, beauty below, beauty within, right? I said, that is radical, man. Like, that's amazing. I said, you have that, what? Create beauty, live in beauty. That you have those teachings that were already given to you, like from, you know, they're just, there's no, it's thousands of years, you know, it's so beautiful. So I think in answer to that question, that's something I've been thinking about a lot. The language we use, the language we choose to use, and how we frame things. And again, I think it applies to what Daniel was saying. We all have those teachings in our those ways that are particular to even the land base that we come from, you know, and the ways that we have created connections and relationships throughout. So I don't know. I feel like I don't know if that would if
No, that's so
I
beautiful. That's so
oh
beautiful.
okay.
Yeah. No, and I'm thinking, you know, of what you said about the language we choose to use and living in beauty. And then when you were talking also about the relationship with land and with place, and this is something that I think frequently gets attached to Indigenous conversations. Of course, the relationships that we each have with our land, but I think in the language we choose to use, there's also an invitation. Relationships don't just happen. They're not just something that is inherited. They are inherited, they are passed down, but they also take active engagement and they take participation, and relationships too can be forged and can be created. And I think there's a lot of room there for non-Indigenous and Indigenous alike to really look at the language we use and look at the places we are and the communities that we are or are not participating in, and to call to really participate in that beauty in those ways. I think that's a really lovely way to go into this evening. Unless there's any final questions among our panelists that I realize I didn't offer you space for, I'm happy to continue to host if there's further conversation. But I think that's such a lovely reminder to live in beauty and to remember the language we choose to use. I haven't moderated one of these online in a while, so Vika, Noi, I'm not quite sure where we want to go from here, other than from myself, Clayana Chinook. Thank you very much for joining me on this panel, for indulging and alleviating my doom and gloom mentality. I'm certainly a glass half empty type if it hasn't been apparent, but my own daughter here is my constant reminder of beauty and joy, and the perspectives that you have so graciously given myself and our fellow audience members this evening. I really do take to heart each and every one of you. Madeline, I grew up in Pennsylvania, and so proximal to Appalachia and that territory and that land as well. But otherwise, I think we'll have this recording posted, and hopefully others will find their way to it. And I just, again, thank you so much to ASA and to Noi and Vika and Hillary and the Fine Arts Center for bringing us all together and allowing us to have this conversation, and introducing myself to some of these panelists' works, which I had not read previously as well.
Sound like curiosity. Thank you.
Thank you so much.